Item 3 is approval of the agenda. Is there a motion and second for approval? So moved. Moved by Wise, second by Lallam. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. Item 4 is council consideration to reject all bids for the 2019 asphalt patch repairs project number 1922 from Dunnick Inc. in the amount of $102,552.99. And I'll look for a motion and second for approval of that. I have a motion by Vilhauer and a second by Lallam. And I'd like Heath to explain this.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Members of council, this item before you this evening that we'll discuss here in the Public Works Finance Safety Committee is subsequently going to be proposed to be put on the consent agenda at the regular meeting, pending your approval of that. What we attempted to do here is put together a asphalt patch repair project with the city street department operating funds. The street superintendent, Rob Bainen's got a fair amount of dollars in his operating fund every year to go towards maintenance activities such as patching of our asphalt streets and concrete areas. He has started or initiated a quote project, but is bound to some financial limits as with any quote per state statute. So what he was attempted to do here was expand the scope of that project through a bid for the same type of work. We put a bid out in the hopes to obtain about a $50,000 project, and as you can see on the agenda item title, we came in over double that. So what we're proposing is to go ahead and reject this bid, and we will proceed accordingly with doing what we can with the financial constraints that Rob has with that budget right now under a quote. And there might be some room to work in some additional patch work under some of our current contracts that we have with some of the contracted work throughout town. But other than that, we'll just get by with the bare necessities as we're able to with the funds we have by those means. So we are proposing to reject these bids because of the price that it came in. We did contact the contractor to try to figure out why we had such a discrepancy on the engineer's estimate, and they had a little too many uncertainties in their bid. They weren't sure how much handwork was going to be necessary on some of these patches, the size of them not being quantified for them to know exactly whether they're dealing with a 2-foot by 2-foot patch or a 20-foot by 20-foot patch, for example. So they priced their numbers accordingly, which were a lot higher than what we anticipated and more than what we have to put towards this effort.
So Heath, will the street department still be working with Dunnick the way they have been in the past on a patch by patch basis then?
They will, and again, up to the point that Rob can do as under a quote, which is up to $50,000. And once he's maxed out on that, I believe he's about halfway through those funds at this point. He's done about $27,000 worth of work, and it doesn't take long to eat through the rest of that $50,000, but he will continue down that path.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Any questions, Councilman Vilhauer?
I should know this, but I guess clarify it for me. I mean, we patch some of our own potholes too, right? I mean, Rob's got crews that patch. So is that a fair statement?
It is correct.
Okay. So what does Dunnick do? At what point do they step in and have to take over fixing a spot that Rob or his crew can't do?
That's a good question, Councilman Vilhauer. I believe the focus of this patch work that he's got quoted now and what the focus of this bid would have been is the larger patches where a paver is ideal to lay that asphalt back down. The patchwork that the street crew performs, they try to keep it minimized in size so that the quality of the repair is in good shape and not, doesn't impede traffic by being bumpy or rough or things like that. So once these patches get to a certain scope, having a mini paver or a full-blown paver on site to perform that work is what the targeted patch sizes are for this.
Councilman Lallam?
Heath, would it have been better if we would have identified areas that we were looking to do that on so they knew exactly what the scope of their project would have been? I mean, is that something that would have helped our project go further perhaps would be a better way of putting it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's another great question. I appreciate you asking me that because this is something we talked about with the contractor too prior to the meeting. One of the things I've proposed in next year's budget that I've already been in discussions with Superintendent Bainan about is formalizing a large patch repair contract. And in that large patch repair contract, we would do just that. We would identify the size and locations of certain patches throughout town. I mentioned that to Dunnix, who the bid was from here, and they agreed. He said that's exactly what they've seen in other communities. It really helps them sharpen their pencil to put their best foot forward on those bids. And so it's something we have in the works for next year, but just haven't had in place yet for this year.
Yeah, I mean, that would allow them to at least know what they're running into. They'd be able to drive around and identify the areas, map it out. So, I mean, that would have been, I don't know if we'd have got half, but we could have got probably closer.
I would agree, based on that conversation we had with the contractor.
Okay.
Thank you for that question.
Any other questions or comments? All right, I'll look for action. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion carries. Item number 5 is discussion on request for proposals for stormwater utility fee and structure assessment. And this is just a discussion, so no recommendation here, but I'll let Heath explain it.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So as the council is full well aware, kind of on the heels of the last discussion we just had, our budgets, as we've gone through the bidding season this year, have been tight. And some of the talking points that have come out of those discussions on bid awards and bid rejections and reprioritizing work for this construction season, if you recall some of those discussions, some of the ideas that we've had and planted seeds on are the idea of implementing such sources of revenue such as a stormwater utility. A stormwater utility is something that several municipalities use throughout South Dakota and in the surrounding region for that matter. And Watertown is one of the exceptions to those municipalities. We do not currently have a stormwater utility established. What this request for proposals does is we've sent this out to a few different consultants around the region that have expertise in helping establish municipal stormwater utilities. Through the preliminary thought that the engineering office has given this and through some internal discussions with the finance office and the mayor and the attorney, we wanted this, the idea of a utility to be put forth as simple as possible, a simple model built if the council were to subsequently pass this. We wanted it to be a fairly simple model to be put forth to the council for the community to wrap their minds around and to clearly understand. And so that's what the RFP details is, requesting proposals for assistance in establishing a fee and structure of our potential stormwater utility. And the deadline for receiving these proposals we put in here to be July 3rd, and we'd hope to review those and have them on the agenda for as soon as the July 15th meeting to potentially get this implemented and get the consultant on board with carrying out the next steps of the process pending council's approval of the implementation of something like this.
Thank you. Any questions? Councilman Danforth?
Heath, are these funds then that are collected, are they restricted and they can't be used for anything other than what they were collected for? How are they used and controlled?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I may have to defer to Matt or even the mayor on this one too, but generally speaking, the money that you bring in off of a stormwater utility, the answer would be yes. You would expect to see them used for stormwater improvements. Now, that being said, what that obviously does is free up other general fund money to be utilized for other community efforts, whether it be public amenities, parks and rec, other street repair projects, whatever it might be. You've got that additional general fund money now freed up to allocate towards those community expenses that the community would like to see done. So generally speaking, yes. I don't know from a legal standpoint if we're 100% obligated to spend them on that, but that's definitely some points of clarity that we would be obtaining throughout this process and educating everybody with as well.
Thank you. We have numerous enterprise funds already. We have a sewer utility, garbage. Airport is an enterprise fund. Then, of course, the municipal utilities have enterprise funds under the city. So we use them in the same way. And likely we would start very small with this. We don't spend a ton of money on stormwater work. It seems to fall to the back, and that's part of the reason for doing this. We'd have dedicated money to do stormwater projects. So, Councilman Lallam?
Heath, do you have any idea what they're looking at as a bid amount for this kind of consulting?
You know, I did anticipate that question, but I don't have a good answer for it. I really would be speculating. We have not talked any real hard numbers with any of the consultants that we sent this out to, so I'm anxious to see what those will come back as in the proposals. But it would be wild guess to estimate, you know, what it would be in tens of thousands,
Yeah.
20, maybe 30, speculating.
Is there companies around here that does that locally or within a smaller region?
Yeah, there are, you know, locally, I'm not sure of the local presence of consultants that have direct experience with this. I believe that one of them may have partnered with other companies on work like this. But we did reach out more regionally to a couple in Sioux Falls, a couple of consultants in Sioux Falls, and then one that's also based in Sioux Falls but has an office in the Twin Cities area as well, has a high level of expertise in this area.
Councilman Bueller?
Heath, question. What similar communities, do we have any idea how they structure that, what they charge for that? And is it by property, I'm assuming?
Yeah, that's a great question, Councilman Bueller. So there are several ways to establish the stormwater utilities, and municipalities do it differently depending on which one you're in. Now, when I talked about the complexities and whether we want to keep it simple or get real complex, those calculations that you ask about can be based on actual percent impervious for each lot in town, which is obviously one of your more complex ways to figure this because of the detail in calculating that actual impervious area on every lot. That's the concrete, the asphalt, the rooftops, the shingles. Everything that water is going to run off of completely is the impervious area that gets calculated. And then there's a calculation that gets that's formulated, and then each property is assessed depending on their area of imperviousness or their percent of imperviousness based on their whole lot area. Now, the more extreme, the other end of the spectrum is just do a flat rate, like in residential areas. You charge a flat utility fee on a per month basis throughout the year for X amount of dollars per lot. And usually, you know, those dollars can range, you know, again, I'm just throwing numbers out here, but anywhere from $2 to $5 a lot per month, let's say. And then that money is just a simple fee that's collected as a stormwater utility fee on their monthly utility bills. So it really varies on how that's calculated, and we preferred internally, at least staff discussions thus far, wanted to keep it as simple as possible as far as how we calculate that. And that's for a couple reasons. One is to foster some clearer level of understanding of what this utility is and how it's getting assessed, but then also the longevity of it. We don't want to have to create more work for people and staff that we don't have to continue to calculate changes in impervious areas over the years, to continue to reassess every year what percent impervious is out there on new developed areas. That becomes very complex and a staff load as well that we wanted to try to prevent.
Councilman Vilhauer?
I guess I want to follow up and make sure I understand, Heath and Mayor, your response to Mike's question a while ago. Okay, this would, and I'm probably looking at Kristen or Matt now, this would be an enterprise fund or a part of an enterprise fund. You're shaking your head no, Kristen. So that would it would be going to the general fund then? Is that where we'd be going from an accounting perspective?
I'll let Matt follow up when I point out a couple of things. We actually have some of the funds in both the general fund and the capital improvement. We do have our water resources in the general fund, and that has around $60,000 budget. But then if it was to be the actual project, that would sit in the capital improvement fund. So I would say to Matt's probably going to hit on the restrictions of it, but we would probably have to establish a kind of a combination because it does have two funds that kind of.
Okay, but it would not hit an enterprise fund though?
No.
Okay.
I'm corrected.
Yeah, and I would just follow up to say that it is limited. The use of those funds is limited to the operation, repair, maintenance, et cetera, of public stormwater utilities. Facilities, excuse me.
We currently have a lot of work that goes into stormwater that isn't broken out at this time. The street department does work, the sanitary sewer department does work, and we bid projects out, and parts of our street projects include stormwater facilities. Those could be broken out, and a lot of different things could be charged into this fund that we would create. Anybody else have a question or comment? None? Okay. There are more to come on this, obviously. The first step is just to see what the consultants have to say and study it, and we're a long way from implementing it. We're just looking into it at this point. So the next item on the agenda is presentation on parliamentary procedure by Mark Roby. And Mark, I'd invite you to come up to the podium. I asked Mark to do this because we're going through a change of council today, and as far as I know, I've never seen this done, and council members and myself too just take these seats and are expected to understand all this process of how the meeting is run. So I know this is an area of interest for Mark, and we've talked about it in the past, and he knows a lot about this subject, so he graciously agreed to come and give us a lesson. So thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mayor. I would also state she couldn't find anybody else to do it. Now, a couple opening remarks, kind of a baseline. First off, I'm not an expert, but I did take a class in college from an expert, and I did stay at a Holiday Inn a number of times. Two, my remarks are based on this little Bible, Robert's Rules of Orders, which you subscribe to as a council, but you act differently than a body like the legislative bodies and others. So there's nuances of my discussion that kind of don't fit with the way you operate. But on the other hand, a lot of what we'll discuss today I think will help and will apply. And if you follow it, I think your meetings will be just that much better. I'm referencing Robert's Rules of Orders, and then the professor who I still remain in close contact with, John Erickson at Drake University, retired professor, who was a nationally renowned parliamentarian running national meetings of organizations as large as the National Education Teachers Organization and other meetings, which can be quite chaotic. So with that as a backdrop, I can tell you these are the 4 things we're going to cover. 6 real basic steps, of which the first 2 are difficult to apply, as I just witnessed, but we're going to talk about them anyway. We're going to talk about some basic misconceptions which really point to using parliamentary procedure slows things down and causes problems, and it becomes a scapegoat. And yet, when you're on a difficult issue, parliamentary procedure can, in fact, make it more efficient, more productive, and better. So it's one of those areas that we'll have maybe some discussion on that. And then third, we're going to talk about the abused or misused motions, either intentionally, which is very rare, but oftentimes throughout a lack of knowledge. And I'll give you some examples, and then we'll talk about questions. So here are the first 6 steps. We're going to talk about how to get that main motion on the floor. We're going to talk about debate and how to begin the discussion of debate. We're going to talk about how to amend. We're going to talk about calling the question on a motion. Hey, I'm tired of talking about it. Let's move on. And then how to take the vote and how to interrupt. Like I say, the first 2 are a little bit unique, but we're going to talk about them anyway. So first off, in your rules, the mayor, the chair, is called the presiding officer. And so that's a little different. Most organizations, it's the chair that they refer to. And most of Roberts talks about that in his book. But in your case, in Rule 5, you're referred to as the presiding officer. But you have adopted Robert's Rules of Order as your standard for parliamentary procedure. So somebody makes a motion. More often than not, it's the mayor in your case, but at other meetings, somebody from the floor would raise, and I'd like to make a motion, Mr. Chair, or the presiding officer, and then a motion is made. and then the mayor restates the motion, and a second is asked for by the mayor or the chair. Oftentimes, you guys immediately give a second. The key point on this that I'll make, whether you're a general legislative body or a council like you are today, is there's two misconceptions. First off, seconding doesn't mean you approve of it. Seconding just means we're going to talk about it. And oftentimes the second will vote against a motion, but thinks it's worthy to have the discussion. Obviously, if there is no second, there's no discussion. And you shouldn't try to start one if it's your motion. But I think on almost everything on your agenda, there's always a second, from what I've seen over the years. And then the other misconception is you can withdraw a motion or change a motion, and you do not have to ask permission from the second. A lot of people think you do. Because the second might have been against your motion that you want to change or modify. So that's the first step, is you get the motion on the floor, which the mayor did just a few minutes ago, talking about those individual items. Then the general discussion begins. And I caution you to remember, don't ever try to give the arguments while you're making a motion. Wait till there's a second and wait till it's been approved for floor debate. After the second, the mayor should then call on whoever makes the motion. In this case, more often than not, they'll call on a department head, especially when it deals with streets or sewers or something like that, and they become the first commenter on the motion that's on the floor. The best way to do it is to pro and con it. So then you look for somebody to be on the con, then you go back to the pro and the con, and in legislative debates and forums, that works well. In your case, you're asking questions, so it's hard to do that pro and con. Not every time, but if you ever get in a situation where you sense the chair should look for a pro and then a con, pro and a con, because it provides for a much better standard of debate and can influence somebody. If you have just a bunch of pro people for it, then suddenly I might be for it because everybody's talking for it, whereas there may be a majority against it, they're just not talking. So it provides a better outcome for the public that's watching when you have that pro or con dialogue. Second part of it is you should call on anybody that has a question or a comment on the motion first before calling on somebody to talk for the second time. You always want to yield to that new person that's on the council before you allow somebody to talk 2 or 3 times. You want to get a multitude of ideas. But again, those two are a little bit more difficult in the way you're organized, because almost every time Mayor Karen makes the motion, here's item 3, here's item 4, and calls on staff often to make the comments. Have you ever made a motion from the floor that isn't on the agenda? Anybody? No, I didn't think so. Okay, amending motions, though, is something you do every meeting. You see something up there, you think it needs to be changed, and so you talk about that. The key here is you can amend a motion, one of your items, as ad infinitum, as many times as you want. But you can only have one amendment on the floor at a time. That's so key. I've seen people try to do that. So if you've got an amendment on the floor and another amendment comes and it's seconded, the chair immediately should rule that out of order because we have an amendment on the floor to deal with. So there's 3 types, pretty easy: add, insert consecutive words, strike consecutive words, or do both. That's how you make amendments. The substitute amendment is kind of an interesting one, and you can do that, and you should have that option in your tool bag. When you look at substitute amendment, it's where you vote to substitute the main amendment with something that's different. And then it's seconded, you debate that motion, and then it can replace the amendment on the floor with a substitute amendment. Really radically changes the debate that's going on. And then the other one that's there's a lot of misconception on is that we can't have a hostile amendment to the main motion. Yes, you can. As long as you're talking about taxes, and let's just take, for example, we're going to raise taxes as the main motion. And then one of you offers up an amendment to not raise taxes or do it 1% instead of 3%. That's a hostile motion to the main motion, but you can do that because the general intent is germane to the topic at hand, which is taxes. And that's so important. So again, if you're talking about taxes and somebody wants to talk about plumbing rates, the mayor would want to call them out of order. But if you're talking about raising taxes and then you vote to have an amendment that would say, no, we're not going to raise taxes, then the mayor would call that in order and ask for a second. So any questions on amendments? Yes.
Mark, I was confused on this just at the last meeting on amending. We amend, we get a motion, get a second to amend, and then we vote on that amended motion, and then we vote on the motion as amended?
Good point. Glad you brought that up. So a motion is made, and then it's made, and then you move to amend the motion, and it's seconded, and the chair gets a second. Then the chair would ask for debate on the motion. Should turn to you because you made the amendment motion. You should speak first. Then she should look for anybody that's opposed to the amendment. They should then speak. Then she should go back any other pro comments, if none, any more con comments, and then go back and forth. Then you would call the question, which we'll talk about in a minute, on that amendment. You would vote for the amendment, yea or nay. You could vote for it yes, and it passes, and then the motion can still fail as amended. So it's a subsidiary motion to the main motion. Does that help? Make sense? Okay. Okay, everybody clear on hostile amendments? I seen people get their noses out of joint on that because, you want to raise taxes and the person next to you wants to cut them and makes an amendment to your motion. That's very much a part of parliamentary procedure. It's called a hostile amendment. Okay, the next one is calling the previous question. A lot of people just say, hey, I call the question. I do this all the time at meetings when I'm at a meeting because I'm ready to vote, But the key about this is that calling the question is one of those power tools in your kit when you're using parliamentary procedure. And why is that? Even though a second's required, it's not debatable. You can't say, so I call the question, Matt seconds it, and then Bruce wants to say, well, wait a minute, I'm not done talking. Bruce, you're out of order because it's not debatable. Okay, I could have gone to Don, but then he'd tell Mom. So it's not debatable, which is why it requires a 2/3 vote to approve. And that's where you see that 2/3 come in when people are using not debatable motions. And yet we have to at some point end the discussion. So the way that works is the member calls, I move the previous question. The mayor looks for a second. Second is made. It's not debatable. If approved, it ends the debate, the discussion on the question. If amendment, again, it's a 2/3 majority vote to get the question ended. Then you go to vote on the main motion. Does that make sense? Okay.
Mark, I had a question for you.
Yep.
Right here, over here.
Yep.
If you need more discussion, somebody calls the question, what do we do then? I mean, if somebody does, if we feel there should be additional discussion on that item.
First off, you hope that you don't get a 2/3 vote. You look around and you kind of say, you do the nonverbal. But there's another way to do it here in a minute, and I'll go through that. Incidental motions. Yep.
Mark, and it's 2/3 of those that are present. In other words, not 2/3 of your.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm assuming all 10 members are here, so that's why 7 out of 10 would be the 2/3 motion. You agree with that number, Matt? Okay.
If there's less than 10 of us here,
Then it's right. 6 of 9, 5 of 8. Okay. Mayor, question? Okay. Let's look at the next slide that talks about the next step. So we're done. We've called the previous question, and now we're going to call for a vote on the main motion. What the mayor should immediately do is restate the motion. Oftentimes, when you're hurrying, you don't, but you really need to, especially motions that have a lot of amendments to it. So everybody's clear. I've been in so many meetings where people will say, well, now what are we voting on? Or was it amended or what, or which amendment's bad? Help me again. So the mayor, the chair, needs to, I think, restate that motion. And so everybody knows what's going for. And then you need to, as you did, which I compliment you on, you need to give both sides the fair. All those in favor signify by saying yay or yes or aye, and then the same for those opposed. You give the same consideration. All those opposed to the motion say no or nay, and then the vote's taken. And it's just a simple majority on most votes, except when called out by 2/3. And your parliamentarian should know those by the back of his hand, I'm sure. Okay, now we're going to talk about how to interrupt. Okay, the question's been called, Bruce, and you want to interrupt that vote because you'd like to discuss it some more. Well, there's 3 ways to do that. And then we'll talk about some other ways, because there's plenty of ways to do it. The first one is you raise to a point of information. Mr. Mayor or Ms. Mayor or the chair or presiding officer, I'd like to have a point of information. The mayor would stop the debate and the discussion at that time and turn to the member and say, state your point of information. And the member would then provide that. And then the mayor would make a ruling. Those are done on procedure. Are we going to vote on the amendment, Mayor, first, and then the main motion? And the mayor would say, yes, we are. Okay, thank you. And then you go back to the discussion at hand. So the point of information is a tool in your handbag to make sure, if your phone goes off and you get caught in a side discussion, you miss something, you ask a procedure question to the mayor. That's not debatable. It can't be overruled by the committee. The mayor, the chair, ruling stands. The second one is a point of parliamentary inquiry. And again, it's a question to the chair concerning procedure. First one was content. Now we're on procedure. I made a mistake. The first one was on content. On parliamentary inquiry, it cannot be appealed. Again, the chair's answer, the mayor's answer and opinion is finite. So when is a procedure? It's used when you are confused, as I was on the first point, because the first one was about content. This one's about procedure. So you rise to a point of parliamentary inquiry. Is this going to require a 2/3 vote, Mayor, or just a simple majority? You make the ruling. Your parliamentarian may have to correct you, but that's how that one's handled. But again, not debatable. Council can't override the chair on that point. The third one is the one that's used most often and has the most power. It's a point of order. And the way that works is the council member would rise to the presiding chair, mayor, I rise to a point of order. You don't, but in a lot of legislative bodies, people literally get up from the chair, I rise to a point of order. And that's why the Robert's Rules calls it that. But you can just simply say a point of order. And the chair would then look at the member and say, state your point of order. What is it? And the member says, my point is this. It's not a debate, it's a statement about the point of order. I don't think we ought to be talking about taxes. We should have done that at the budget meeting, Mayor. I think this is out of order. The chair then says the point of order is taken well taken, or is not well taken. If it's well taken, she then can go on and do something else to bring the discussion back, and maybe we throw the motion out at that point. Or she can say the motion is not well taken, and that ends it. And the debate goes back to the discussion. However, the member can then say, wait a minute, I want to appeal your decision to the board. And then the board can consider it. The way that works is the chair would give your reasons for why the point was not well taken. I've never seen this done when it's been a good point. We'll consider it. It's always when it's not well taken is it appealed. So the chair would then state the reason for why it was not well taken. And I think we can do taxes in the budget meeting or outside the budget meeting. Then you go back to the point of order person to make their case, and then you allow each representative to talk once on that point of order only. Okay, and then the chair says at the conclusion, the chair then gets to restate again. So the chair gets 2 whacks at this issue, point of order, everybody else gets 1. And then the chair says, the question is, shall the decision of the chair, the mayor, be sustained? Those in favor of sustaining the chair say aye. Those opposed to sustaining the chair say no. And it takes a majority of vote in the negative to overrule the chair, 6 of 10. Questions on that? Okay. Now, the basic misconception, and I hit on this earlier, is where we blame Robert's Rules and these seconds and all these motions and point of orders and all these other crap from getting our work done, and it becomes a scapegoat. When in fact, and members often groan and complain about it, often it's just because they don't understand parliamentary procedure. But yet, I found that those that know parliamentary procedure know its power, and as a result, as with anything with power, it can and is often abused. So, following parliamentary procedure protects those that are not knowledgeable from those that are knowledgeable and the power. So this is some of the misused motions, and goes back to Bruce how you can reconsider things. We're going to look first at motions to correct actions on actions that's been taken by the body, and then we're going to look at the motion to lay on the table versus postpone. So the first motion to correct action is called the motion to reconsider. A motion is passed, the vote was called before you were ready to vote, and Bruce, you voted on the majority side, even though you were opposed to the motion. You can then ask for that motion to be reconsidered because you were a part of the majority on that vote. On the other hand, if you were part of the minority, you cannot ask for the motion to be reconsidered. And that sometimes causes people, especially on voice votes, to play the game of, well, I want to reconsider this motion even though I voted against it. I'm going to ask for a reconsideration. The way out of that is you always require, a head count vote. Like they do at the legislature. They hit the green or the red light and the vote is recorded that way. So that's one of the gotchas that can happen in a council setting where you're doing a lot of voice votes, is tracking that if you have a lot of reconsiderations. So I just bring that up as a point to think about. Yeah.
Mark, maybe explain it clearly, but even when, okay, tonight we have 3 new council members coming on. Let's say that one of them did not like an action that we had just taken, even just a few minutes ago, as the outgoing council. It would still need to be someone who voted on the majority to bring that up again. In other words, one of the new members could not do it.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. This motion to reconsider has higher precedence than what's on the agenda next, or what you're discussing. So it interrupts the standard course of business. That's important to know. Motion to reconsider is a high precedence motion. It must be considered immediately. The chair can't say, well, I'll consider your motion to reconsider once we get through the budget. No, you need to deal with it at that time. It must be handled immediately. It can only be done once. Bruce reconsiders, then Don wants to reconsider, then Adam wants, we do it once on a motion. You can reconsider it once. It should be done before the end of the meeting, the same meeting that the main motion passes. You don't want to wait till next council meeting to reconsider. It's a majority vote only, and there's some special uniquenesses to it when you're looking at your bylaws, which you rarely do, but like the home rule charter would be an example of where you can't reconsider a home rule charter thing. Yeah, Don.
I heard you say this is high priority. Let's say the motion passes. It's an hour later meeting, somebody has second thoughts and wants to reconsider at that point, but you've already voted on it now.
You bet. You'd reconsider it at that point.
You can.
Yep, because you're in the same meeting. That person may have gotten out in the hallway or gotten a text message that says, you realize it's going to do this to me? And new information is arrived at once a decision is made. So normally what happens, and you see it in the legislature all the time, a bill sponsor gets up there and makes a motion, votes against his motion, and then as soon as it fails, because he knows it's going to fail because they do nose counts, move to reconsider. And then it's the body handles it. Yep.
But we cannot bring that up at a later meeting then. Let's say even the next night we're meeting again.
Correct.
We cannot bring a motion to reconsider at that point.
Correct. Then the next one, any more questions on reconsider? How am I doing on time? Need to move it along. Is the motion to rescind. The motion to rescind. This is how you get around the motion to reconsider. And again, it shows you the power of Parliament, because every time you think Robert's rules hamstrings me, there's a path to where you want to go. And this is how you do it. Because rescind picks up where reconsider leaves off. You can rescind at the next meeting. I move to make a motion to rescind something. Roberts suggests technically you should do it at the same meeting. But you can do it at the next meeting for a body that meets at least quarterly, and you certainly do. You meet every 2 weeks. Again, once per meeting, a negative vote can be reconsidered, rescinded. You cannot undue action that's taken. So let's say last meeting, we decided to repave the road out in front of Mark Roby's house. And then I irritate you. And so then you make a motion the next meeting, and they've started repaving, to rescind that action. Well, you can't. You can't rescind some action that's already underway. So that's where you'd be called out of order. Don?
An action that's been voted on, approved, but not underway, at the next meeting, we can vote to rescind.
You bet.
Does that cause a problem with us when it comes to publishing our schedule, our agendas in advance?
It certainly can.
I was gonna ask you that question because you're also an open meetings guy.
Well, and look at the next line. If you provide advance notice, it's on the agenda, you get a majority vote on your motion to rescind. If you do it without notice, it requires a 2/3 majority. Plus, you have that risk of an open meetings violation. But Roberts didn't know when he wrote this back in 18 whatever, didn't have open meetings. So that's why, leaving open meetings aside, but just speaking in terms of total Roberts rules, without notice, it's a surprise. I arrive at the meeting and Josh makes a motion to rescind. Hey, I wasn't ready for that. You now have to get a 2/3 majority of the vote on your motion to rescind.
My question is, do all this, what if some of the members aren't here at that next meeting? Could you still call to rescind?
You
it?
bet. Yep. It's if
The
you've got a
original
quorum,
members.
if you've got a quorum, yep,
And it's 2/3 of the present.
correct. Yep. Now, it ought to tell you something. A motion that's a surprise to rescind, again, when Roberts goes to the 2/3 majority, in my view, there's a value judgment there. It ought to be difficult to make that motion because, I can't attend the next meeting. You know darn well I'd vote for it or, vote against it, whichever side it is. So that's why Roberts makes it that more difficult. Okay? All right, that's that. Now, the next one is the most misused motion by far. This is the guilt. This is the one. This is the cat's meow. This is the top. This is the one. The motion to lay on the table, to table a motion. I go to meetings and I see people do this, and it just grates me because it's like, on this chalkboard or pick your favorite one. It is the most misused motion forever, and Roberts clearly recognizes that. In fact, he says it's a violation of basic principle of general parliamentary law. Only a 2/3 vote can rightfully suppress a main question without allowing free debate. He hated the motion to table, and he said so in his various editions of his book. What lay on the table is to do, and when I say lay on the table, they used to walk up to the clerk's table and lay it on the table. So to table a motion, same way. Have you ever heard that at one of our meetings here at the council? I know I have. It's to postpone business temporarily. And the reason you do that is to do something more urgent. Here's an example that popped into my mind. Let's say the motion is we're going to sign up a new air carrier at the airport, and the motion comes up. But it just so happens that the mayor knows, or one of the council members knows, that the speaker from the airline just landed at the airport and isn't going to be here for about 10 or 15 more minutes. Hard to have a discussion without them here. So it might be appropriate at that time. I'd like to table this motion until Bob from United Express arrives here in 10 minutes. Okay, why is this motion so misused? Because it's not debatable. You can't debate that. And it's a simple majority to pass. So whoever makes the motion in that very short sentence, and the mayor, you'd call them out of order if they made a 30-minute presentation on the motion to lay it. It's a very short, concise motion, a reason to table a motion. And then it requires a majority vote only. You saw my editorial comment, and Professor Erickson told us in his writings and in his various manuals that he's produced on Robert's Rules of Orders. So you never want to use the motion to lay on the table, basically, is the best advice I can give you. Questions on the motion to table. It's not debatable. So how it gets used, since I know parliamentary procedure better than everybody at the table, is I make a motion to table next year's budget, and I get a second. And then two of you want to start debating it. The mayor has to call you out of order. And you throw your arm, well, that's malarkey, I mean, we can't. The table motion, it was seconded. Hopefully the majority would vote against it. And with this admonition that you should never use a motion to lay on table, next time one of your cohorts uses it, give them the evil eye. Now, what do you do then if you want to do something with a motion that's out there that you need to do? Well, the next best thing, just slightly above to put on the table, is to postpone indefinitely. It's seldom used, and really what it is just a vote against the main motion. I like to postpone the budget for next year because I'm against it. And so what the person making the motion does, uses it as a straw ballot to see how it's going to vote and how people are going to vote on. That's probably a bad example. But it also allows, because it is debatable, that you can discuss the main motion again. And again, here's a limitation. On main motions, on amendments, you can speak a lot. You can speak 4 or 5 times if the debate goes on. But when you're doing a postponed motion of a main motion, you can only speak twice. The best thing to do is this one, postpone to a certain time. I'd move that we postpone the bike path upgrade project till next meeting. And the reason for that is that I've got some information coming to me tomorrow that I think will allow us to do this for maybe half the price of what we got in the budget. Gets a second, and then turn back to the person making the motion, and then you have that discussion. Postponing to a certain time creates 2 kinds of orders. One is a general order and the other is a special order. A general order requires a majority vote and does not interrupt. So what do I mean by that? Well, if you're doing a course of business and then I interrupt, it becomes a special order and requires a 2/3 majority. Especially if somebody makes a motion to postpone indefinitely right in the middle of your presentation on why you're for something. That's a special order and requires a 2/3 motion if it interrupts the course of debate. But if it's done, for example, right when Sarah calls for the question, and then somebody says, wait a minute, I want to postpone to a certain time because I have some new information, that does not interrupt the general course of business, and it can be a majority vote. The chair makes that ruling, whether it's a special or general order. And if a member disagrees with the chair, that's when they do a point of order or point of parliamentary procedure or a point of information. That's how that would work. So the motion to postpone to a certain time is debatable, and the bottom line right there, it fixes the table motion and how it's abused and misused. I'm done. Yeah. You're out of order.
Thank you, Mark. I'm sure we have questions. Councilman Villar?
Mark, if we take an action and we blatantly abuse parliamentary procedure, does that nullify the validity or the legality of the action? So the action we take is still good to go.
You can make a motion to table something and do it totally illegally, but it doesn't. If you get the majority vote, it is on the table.
Okay.
We're just ashamed if we mess it up.
Well, there'll be at least one in the audience thinking that. But your parliamentarian hopefully will call that out.
Councilman Roby?
I think we're all guilty, I certainly am, of sometimes follow-up questions. So we may have somebody at the chair there answers my question. I might fire 1 or 2 more because I've got momentum. And really, I'm sort of kind of getting out of order. The way we're sitting here, I can't look and see everybody all the time. We're focused one way or the other. I actually wouldn't mind if we used a gavel because I've been in meetings before where you used a gavel now, it would shock us. It's like the mayor's ruling with an iron fist over there.
I used it once on Bruce.
But I would open that for discussion to my fellow council members. Is that worthy of consideration?
Well, and I I'm glad you brought that up. I have that on my notes, but I would recommend using a gavel. You don't have to pound the thing, but a note on the table, especially when you're making a declarative statement about a point of order or something, does note, or the motion passes, and we're on to the next item. Again, it's one of those things, now, do we really need to do that, groan and moan? But the fact of the matter is, if you look at any legislative body, from the U.S. Congress, and some say it doesn't work very well, let's use our South Dakota legislature. They're using the gavel all the times. The gavel can be misused too. Boom, 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 as they gavel down the speaker or the person trying to speak, especially on a point of order. So, I mean, it can be abused, but most often, 99% of the time, the gavel aids the deliberative process and makes it more efficient. For the reasons, one good reason, you can't see everybody from where you're sitting.
Councilman Lallam.
Mark, do you consider that more like a finality? Like, hey, the gavel's done, let's move on to the
Yep.
next one? I mean, that's, I think, for me at least, that's one of the toughest things. Is like, are we still talking about this thing? I mean, we did make the motion, we're passed.
Your gavel as a member is a question, to call the question.
Okay.
That's when you get finality. Nobody seconds it, and you're
Then
going
we
to
keep
get to,
talking.
then you're going to listen to some more discussion.
Yeah, okay.
But if you get a second, simple majority vote, 6 against you, 4 in favor, we're going to listen to some more. But if you get 6 in front of you, 4 against, then we go to the vote on the main motion.
Okay.
Technically, I should give the floor to someone who wants to call the question before, they can't just burst out.
Yes, they can.
They can.
Yeah, the question is a high precedence.
Okay.
High precedence. So you're doing alternating, pro questions, against questions. And I don't know if you'll ever get there, but the question can be called anytime. I mean, you can make the motion and open it up to Heath, and he's talking, and somebody can interrupt and say, I call the question. It'd be rude, but they could do that. And then you'd ask for a second, because you'd assume they're not being rude. And you'd ask for a second. If there's no second, go ahead, continue, Heath. But it can be made at any time.
Okay.
You're checking the temperature of the water. Hey, I don't want to debate this topic. I'm against it.
Yeah.
So I'll call the question. I'm ready to vote no. My mind's made up.
Heath?
Mark, could you address what Robert's Rules has to say regarding channeling discussion and debate through the chair? And I'll explain my perspective here. I think from this board's perspective, we do a very good job at that. And I'm asking more for my sake and staff's sake. I spent the last 7 years in another community where any response to any question from a council member would be steered back through the chair, not directly to that council member.
Yeah.
Could you elaborate on what Robert's Rules say to that
Well,
matter?
he would approve of that procedure. That would be, he would approve of that. And you see that in the South Dakota legislature in committee meetings. When I'm in a committee meeting testifying to the similar kind of shape, I say, Chair, may I ask a question of, somebody? And then the chair says, will you allow a question to be asked? And then the question is asked. So everything is funneled through the chair. It, again, provides for ability to do pro-con better, more order. You got one council member that's really hot on an issue and wants to spend the next 30 minutes talking about it. Nobody else gets to. It's a way to control that kind of member if that were to ever happen. So it's certainly possible. Whether you want to adopt that kind of procedure, it's up to you. But Roberts would be in favor of that.
Councilman Vilhauer.
Mark, there's certain actions that we take that we have to open up to a public hearing. Okay, so we open it up, public comments, and then we'll close the public hearing. We start debating amongst ourselves, and all of a sudden somebody from the audience wants to come up again. And Mayor, I know you quite often will allow the public hearing to be reopened. What does Robert's Rules say about that situation like that?
Well, first off, you'd make a motion to open to public comment, you'd get a second, and you'd vote. And then you would allow for public comment. At some point, the mayor, thinking it's over, or the time limit is up on that individual, you'd call for an end to the public comment, and you'd probably vote to close that part of the meeting, that main motion, and it's over. If I then come up from the audience and want to talk and take another crack at it, I'm out of order. Now, if you tell the citizen they're out of order, they get a little cranky about that. if you allow them to talk, you're really violating the spirit of fairness and procedure, fairness of the body and of the body politic, the people, as well as the procedure. So I would, figure out a way to say we won't, we aren't allowing any more open public comment on that. If you'd have shown up 15 minutes ago, you could have spoken during the public session or something like that. Now, on the other hand, you might make a motion from the floor, which would be appropriate, to say, Chair, I would like to open up for public comment again and see if you could get a second. And your reason would be because Mark just showed up and he's got something to say on this. It's his neighborhood that's being affected by it. And then your council can decide whether you want to do that or not. But without that kind of motion, out of order and should be carried. And that's where a gavel may have to be used.
Okay, thank you.
Mark, I have a question too, and it's along those lines, but can you, in the past, what we've done is if somebody's closed a public hearing, we can ask a question of somebody in the audience.
Yes.
But we have to make a motion to allow that. Is it
What I would do is
every time you got to do that?
No, what I would do is I'd say, the way I would handle that is exactly what Heath just talked about. I'd say, Chair, I'd like to ask a question of so-and-so from the public. And the chair then could rule on that consideration. It's kind of a point of information, which is about content, and the chair's ruling carries the day. So without saying point of information, I'd say, Chair, I'd like to ask a question of Mark Roby on parliamentary procedure. Would you call him back up? And then the mayor could do that.
I'll allow it.
Right.
We don't take a vote or anything.
No, and nobody can challenge that. Mm-hmm. Nobody can challenge that from it's your call. Mm-hmm. You're the chair. So that's how it's a point of information. It's about content.
So I've often allowed public comment on items that weren't published as a public hearing.
Yeah.
Should I be getting motions and seconds on that, or can I just do that?
You can do that when it's content related, point of information, content related, where you make the call on that. But anytime you're in an area where debate will be forthcoming, I would look for a motion. Because see, when you're making a content decision on your own, there's nothing your members can do to you. It's your call. Now, you could make a decision on a point of information on content, and somebody could raise to a point of parliamentary procedure, call you on that, and then they get to take a whack at you, or they can do a point of order. I think public comment or asking questions of the public outside of the public meetings out of order. You could say, your point is not well taken. Then I appeal the decision, and then we go to a vote of the council, and we handle it. What's nice about that, personalities are left aside, because there's a way to handle it very orderly by using this little guide. Big guide.
Councilman Roby.
I agree with what you said, and I like that procedure. However, it might be all.
I agree with what you said. I like that procedure, but I think we all can think of examples where, when somebody's down here on a topic that, say there's 25 people on something, and they're really emotionally tied to the issue, they're going to want to get up. And oftentimes we see it, they're bouncing up back and forth all the time. That could, if we're going to do that, and I like that idea, we just got to make sure we're clear with the audience what we're going to do, because that bouncing back and forth happens, and that's when you get into the marathons.
Well, I think you demonstrate to the body of public out here when you say, I have a question of content. Mayor, would you consider that question? Here's the question. The mayor can then call the person up and have them answer the question. So the mayor controls that in a somewhat orderly fashion.
And my follow-up to that is, if we're disciplined up here, I think it's easier out there.
Correct. And that's why when you follow the procedure, it's hard, but when you follow the procedure, when you're in a difficult swamp, you got a way out. All of you do.
Councilman Vilhauer.
Mark, does Robert's rules discuss anything about how to conduct an executive session? Let's say that we legitimately, and I got to look at our attorney, always does a good job, make sure we stay on task here. But as far as procedurally within executive session, does Robert's rules say anything, or do we just, pretty well discuss whatever we need to in executive session?
Well, because you can't take action in executive session, Roberts would be silent on executive session. Personally, I believe he's against them. I'm making that up. But since there's no action taken, no debate, there is discussion, but there's no debate, or public discussion, no action taken. He's silent on it. He would require you to take a motion to go into executive session. You need, by South Dakota law and Robert's rules, you need to state why you're going into executive session, and then a majority vote lets you go in there. Good question.
Councilman Lallam.
Mark, what, a lot of times we give the general public, a certain amount of time. Can we actually time them? Say you got 2 minutes, you got 5 minutes?
That's really a city procedure, a city rule, and if you don't have that spelled out in your rules, you really should. Again, it's a protection of, I elect you guys to be efficient and conduct business, and I don't want you quitting because you're having 72-hour meetings.
Right.
And you don't want to be on here. So, and that's what you're, again, when somebody gets up and makes a short comment, sits down, you get the point, you really appreciate it.
Yeah.
But when somebody gets up here and lectures you, that's hard.
For 10 to 15
So
minutes.
you really ought to have that called out, I think, spelled out in your rules, and I don't think you have that spelled out, and many cities do. You'll hear the mayor start a public session by saying, I'm going to, because it's a hot issue.
Yep.
I'm going to restrict everybody to 2 minutes. Well, why didn't you restrict it when they were talking about swings at the park last week? Because it wasn't a hot issue. Well, that's a pretty poor way to run a business. You ought to have rules set up before you know whether the issue's hot or cold onto what you're going to allow in public comment.
Would that be something we'd put like when we send out the agenda items, say we will give public comment 2 minutes per person?
Yes, but I would call it, what's the document you sent me, Mayor?
That's part of our ordinance. It's the rules.
Yeah,
our
the
council
rules.
We
Yeah,
got council
it should
rules.
be like Rule 17 in there.
Okay.
I quoted Rule 5 because the mayor is supposed to be called the presiding officer.
Okay.
So I would do it, I'd encourage you to look at some way of incorporating that in the rules.
Okay, that's what I need to know. Thank you.
That'd be good. I've stated that before. When there's a room full, is usually, if there's only a handful of people, I normally don't say anything.
You should
but
do it every time.
I should.
It's
yeah.
like
I get
gaveling
that
every
now.
time.
Right.
When you gavel every time, then when you gavel and somebody's irritated about a motion, it doesn't feel as bad as when you gaveled it just once in the last month. You do it consistently, you follow the procedures consistently, and you really will become more efficient and a better body. It's hard getting through it.
So if there is an item on the agenda which does not have a published public hearing, and I can see there's extra people in the room that likely want to speak, should I ask for a motion to open for public comment?
You can. Be better if one of the members just made the motion. You make a lot of the motions. Mm-hmm. You should try to work towards where some of the motions like that are made by the body.
So a council member would
yeah.
say, I'd like to make a motion that we open
Right.
the
Now,
floor for public comment.
In 2021, when that changes and you're a voting member of the body, then you should be making the motion just like the other 6 members. Mm-hmm. But today, you're in a non-voting until a tie. Really, that kind of a motion should come from one of the council members. But lacking that, the chair certainly can and should.
So I shouldn't be saying I'll look for a motion for approval? I should just wait until someone says
Somebody
that?
should say, I'd like to call the question. Now, again, on the routine matters, the consent agenda, I don't think anybody needs to call the question. I think you can call it.
Well, I take a motion for every item before we discuss it. And I'm the one that says I'm looking for a motion.
Yep. Technically, yes. And technically, you should have the question called, vote on the question, and then vote on the motion every time. That's when procedure gets to be, but, so then you allow somebody to not call the question on a big heated debate, and you end debate and go to a vote. That's when I think the yin and the yang, you get kind of conflicted. You got to do on the little things, you ought to do on the big
Right.
things, and
I
big
get
things
that.
you ought to do
Be
on the little
consistent.
things.
Can't you end debate, Mark over here?
Yeah.
Can't you end debate if there's no other comments though without a motion to call the question?
Yes. Again, the chair should never ask for the question.
Right.
The chair can recommend, I think we're done, let's go to a vote. It's the members' tool, that's your gavel. I'm tired of this discussion. Call the question, Mayor. Mayor says, is there a second? Second. All those in favor of calling any debate and calling the question? Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Let's go to a vote on the motion. So yes, good point, Matt.
I think I've messed that up a few times. Yeah. This is very educational. Are there other questions? Thank you so much, Mark. We'll probably
thank
have
you.
you back again for a second dose.
Thank you all.
The next item on the agenda is old business. Is there any? See none, move on. Item 8 is new business. Is there any new business? Not seeing any. Item 9 is executive session pursuant to SDCL 1-25-2, and we have no reason to go into executive session, so I'll look for a motion to adjourn. Motion by Lallam, second by Y. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those against, say no. We are adjourned, and we'll be back at 5:30 for the council meeting.